Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. That's kind of my Tony Robbins moment. Slightly underwhelming, if I'm honest, but hey, it's Monday afternoon. Despite the intro, I don't really consider myself a consultant. I actually come from the world of tech startups and creative agencies. Currently, yes, I'm the head of digital strategy and innovation at Deloitte Digital. No, I do work for a consulting firm, I suppose, but it's my personal choice not to put the consultant moniker on myself. The other thing that I really love here is we have two screens, and the cameraman has to follow me absolutely everywhere I go, which is going to be lots of fun. Trina, don't be shy, just yell out 5 minutes when I've got a 5-minute warning, yeah? So, okay, presentation is the problem with innovation and 5 ways that we see corporates innovating. I just noticed the clicker is over here. Okay, who can tell me what this is a picture of? Anyone? An aeroplane? Yes? More specific, perhaps? Anyone? It kind of says the answer on the screen. It's a trick question. The first flight. There it is. So the first flight, 1903, the Wright brothers basically stepped in a weird-looking box with wings on it and turned into a bird. How cool is that, right? If you think about it, really what they did is they changed the face of the planet. Back in 1900, it used to take 4 days to travel from New York to LA. Now it takes a couple of hours. I'm sure all of us travel around a lot working in regional roles. We all owe a complete debt of gratitude to these guys. They should have been the rock stars of their day, right? But actually, they weren't at all. No one even wrote about it in a mainstream media outlet for 4 years. The New York Times published an article full year after the first flight with an interview with an expert, industry expert, saying that yes, maybe one day in the far distant future, people might be able to fly. This is a year after they'd already flown. So what has this got to do with innovation? Well, really, the first lesson or the first problem that we see with innovation is it's actually very hard to see. It's hard to see innovation even when it's happening right in front of us. There's often a gap between a game changer and people recognizing that the game has changed. So this is my representation of a person who was there at Dayton, Ohio, witnessed the first flight with their own eyes. This is what people were saying. People can't fly. It's just a trick. So the modern day equivalent, I suppose, is if we go to a magic show, someone pulls a rabbit out of a hat, saw someone in half, maybe someone's doing telepathy or something like that. You kind of witness it with your own eyes, but you question whether there's reality to it. That was the public's reaction when they actually witnessed the first flight. So you might say, well, yeah, that's just, the layperson. They don't really know what's going on. But experts do this all the time as well. This was Western Union's response to the invention of the telephone. They said there's no way this thing is going to be a viable form of telecommunication. They were the experts, literally the industry leader in their industry. This is a memo from US Congress when the automobile was invented. They said, these car things, they're never going to work. They're never going to replace horses and carriages, right? My favorite thing about this is they cited one of the primary reasons was private industry's inability to extract and distribute sufficient gasoline to power these machines. Just think about that. It's actually laughable when you think about it, but that really is a big, big problem with innovation. Even experts fail to see it. It's very hard to see. Problem number 2, innovation happens gradually. And Mike, you kind of had a slide which shows invention happens very quickly and it's happening exponentially, but innovation is not the same thing as invention. Innovation actually takes a lot of grinding out for real things to happen and for real change to happen, right? So we can basically say, well, I call this the incubation curve. It kind of happens before the diffusion of innovation takes off, right? So there's basically 7 steps that we see. First, no one's heard of you. Then they've heard of you and they call you nuts. Then they say, well, okay, sure, it's a kind of a cool thing. Maybe it's a cool toy, but no one's going to use it. It's only when enterprise actually starts to apply these innovations on true business problems, core business problems, not experimentation and weird stuff, prototypes just for the sake of it. It has to be at the core. Then they can't imagine life without it. So just along the bottom of that, I've just juxtaposed. This was an interview with Andy Jassy, word for word. CEO of Amazon Web Services. He said, talking about cloud, the invention of cloud for Amazon, first they said no one's going to use it. Then they kind of evolved to, all right, well, maybe some startups will use it, but they're not really going to use it for anything mission critical. Then a couple of enterprises started using it, and they're like, all right, yeah, they're kind of playing around with some technology and that sort of thing. It's only when enterprises really started to apply cloud on core business problems. I mean, now, tell me one corporate who doesn't have something going on in the space of cloud right now. This is not that long ago. This isn't the Wright brothers. This was just a couple of years ago. We still repeat the same pattern every single day. And I guess one of the key things being the process often does take years. If you look at something like AR, VR, I was presenting at an AR, VR conference 2 weeks ago. Where is that industry up to? Yeah, it's kind of a toy. It's an amazing toy. I love Neil's example, lining up in a bank. What a great use of virtual reality, right? That's still kind of using it as a toy. But there will come a time where these technologies or new innovations or whatever it may be, once it's applied at a core business problem, that's when we really can see, is it going to sink or swim? And can we actually live life without it? Is it a good innovation or not? Smart companies know this. Everyone talks about Apple, but this is my favorite example. Very well documented. They actually invented the iPad before the iPhone, right? So why did they release the iPhone first? Well, it pays to come second. There was already a market of 1 billion smartphones out there, and tablets at the time were these weird, bulky, kind of things that engineers were using and stuff like that. Do you go for the installed market? Everybody is already familiar with what a smartphone is, but our smartphone is better. Go for that. And then once people are used to what an iPhone is, well, 2 years later, hey, presto, here's a bigger iPhone, right? People definitely gravitate more towards things that are improvements on the familiar. The third problem with innovation, it requires us to change. And this is, as we know, the hardest thing in the world. It's a bit slow on the uptake there. That's all right, I'll come back. Hardest thing in the world. All of us are resistant to change as human beings, and corporations are no different. We see this all the time. Even when we know that change is for our own benefit, we still refuse. We're very stubborn. We refuse to change. This is a little illustration I borrowed from an RSA animate of Dan Pink's speech on motivation. We incentivize innovation with an innovation bonus. A very famous MIT study came out saying bonuses of any kind don't work unless we're talking about, kind of very menial tasks or factory kind of repetitive mechanical tasks. So when we're trying to get people to change the world, the most creative thing you could possibly do in the world, how do we incentivize that? Well, innovation bonus, the same way we incentivize a person on a production line. Does that make any sense? We need to change the way we incentivize innovation if we want to really innovate. When innovation is measured generationally, we shouldn't measure results quarterly. How many corporates do we know? They have actual KPIs, quarterly KPIs built around innovation, and they'll come up with really creative metrics for measuring innovation, right? Think about if Amazon had some sort of quarterly KPI on AWS. How far do you reckon they would have gotten with cloud? If Google had KPIs, they're just across the road there, we should ask them, but if they had KPIs around innovation and that sort of thing, do you think they'd be working on self-driving cars and mobile operating systems and all of the cool stuff that they've developed in the past? Probably not, right? We need to change the way that we measure innovation. That's my attempt at a sketch of Jeff Bezos there up in the top right corner. He says, for a long time, well-meaning people may criticize, you need a long-term willingness to be misunderstood. He really talks about the difference between invention and innovation. If you're getting a pat on the back because you say, ta-da, here's my innovation, chances are it's actually probably not that game-changing. It's probably going to be one of those things that's an improvement on the familiar. Invention is cool, but innovation requires a long-term commitment to execution. You really need to grind it out, and you need to have structures in the organization to help make that happen. So, look, as a consulting firm, we work with loads of clients all around the world, around lots of geographies. This next part is basically the 5 ways, broad buckets that we've seen corporates are responding to those 3 problems with innovation. And feel free to take a photo of this slide. Option number 1, upskilling. So this is where we train and build capability within the organization. We go into an organization and we say, hey, you've already got a whole bunch of employees. They probably want to do innovative stuff. Let's just help them do that. Now, that's kind of good in a way. We're attacking the core of the problem. Well, we want to be an innovative organization. Well, great, let's go and make our people innovative. It really attacks the core of the problem, which is great. The problem that we see is you're basically taking people, processes, all of these things that were designed for BAU to do a certain thing, probably not innovate, and then you're trying to apply it to some completely different business process. Typically doesn't work very well. Depending on how you measure it, what we see is you end up kind of bringing up the rear as opposed to leading from the front. So again, it depends on what your goal is with innovation. Number 2, innovation hub or innovation lab. That's what we're all here to talk about, right? Do they work? Do they not? The jury is still out. Well, this is some sort of digital garage environment. Typically, well, it may sit in a different building, but typically on a different floor, right? As Neil said, lots of beanbags and jeans and sneakers and all that sort of stuff. That's great. Now we can attract the right kind of talent. People who would have gone to creative agencies or startups, now we can attract them into a corporate, right? Great. Well, we've got innovative people. What's the biggest problem that we've seen with this? They come up with cool solutions to cool problems, but when it comes, if the corporate is looking to those guys to say, hey, and we're going to solve your core business problems, that's where we see a real disconnect. How do you take those innovations and actually apply them back into the core? How are you going beyond the 4 walls of the innovation lab and actually making the rest of the organization more innovative? There's still a real problem around that. Some people are doing it well, most not. Startup studios. So this is kind of a newish concept. Effectively think of it as a team of consultants or creatives coming into a corporate and saying, listen, you need to build a center of excellence around digital or what have you. Here's what kind of capabilities you need to build. And hey, we have the people on tap, ready to go. We're going to install them within your organization, in your space, co-located, co-working alongside your people to actually work on real business problems. It's kind of like a startup in a box, right? Well, you've basically transplanted a startup type environment into the corporate. And then gradually over time, what you do is you do capability transfer so that you're bringing the consultants out, and either by hiring or upskilling, you're building your own corporate's capabilities from within. We've seen a few interesting models around this. Literally, day before yesterday, I just read TBWA in Melbourne have launched a new offering called Disruption Labs. Not sure if anyone's heard about it. I just saw an article online. Basically, a creative agency saying, you know what, we're no longer going to be remunerated with dollars for head hours, which is kind of the traditional consulting agency type model, right? We have a rate card, we sell head hours. These guys say, you know what, we're going to use our techniques to come into your organization, solve a lot of creative problems, and we're going to be remunerated based on the value that we can deliver. So it's still quite new. We'll see what happens. The good part of it is you only buy what you need as a corporate. Well, you don't need to go out and hire 100 people from day one. You only buy what you need at any given time. The hard part is there's not many consulting firms or agencies out there who are willing to sort of give their people away under a different remuneration model, and that's kind of just an industry thing that needs to change and is changing, but it will take some time. Okay, number 4, incubator. I apologize, Barbara. I came here for a visit the other day and I tweeted, wow, what a cool concept, the Unilever Foundry. It's like a mashup of accelerator and incubator and all this kind of stuff. Turns out it's none of those things, so I do apologize. But yeah, okay, incubator. We've seen lots of good examples of incubators, right? I previously did some mentoring, actually, at Murudi, which is Telstra's incubator here in Singapore. It's cool. It's totally housed separately. It's in a shop house type environment. You bring in a bunch of startups, and they're free to do whatever they want. So from a corporate standpoint, you're really de-risking that failure part that everyone kind of gets tripped up on, which is awesome. You're letting startups do what startups do, rather than kind of cutting them off at the knees as soon as they walk through the door, right? That's great, but it needs to be a long-term play. There's no guarantee that those startups are going to be relevant back to your business, or if your goal is to acquire them or whatever it is. It's very hard to just hand pick and hand select the correct type of startups and then expect them to sort of be innovative in the same way. So it's a longer term play. That's kind of the trade-off there. The final one we call ecosystem, which is some sort of sensing and scanning capability. You might say as a corporation, okay, well, we need to build some sort of capability within the organization. Let's do a massive scan using one of these sensing services of all of the startups around the world who fit within that capability. And then we call it a build, buy, or borrow type decision. Do we acquire them? Do we partner with them? Or do we try to build the capability ourselves? Really good, because you're effectively crowdsourcing the innovation now. But I guess the trade-off is you need to have that long-term commitment. It tends to happen very slowly. You can't really be in control of that. So let's have some fun with this. On the right side, we have the divested approach. Low commitment, crowdsource the hard work, get the market to do all the work, right? That's one approach, but it takes a long time. You need to have that long-term commitment to innovation. And all the way over here on the left, we have invested innovation. Tackle the heart of the problem, but it's hard and it's costly. You can't just do it on a whim. You need to really commit to it. If you're going to invest internally, you need to really commit for the long term. And it can cause collateral damage. That's also, nobody really talks about it, but what about when things start getting automated, people lose their jobs, somebody says, well, I don't see how I fit into that new organization, I'm getting the hell out of here. There is actually collateral damage when you try to do some of these things. So the magic happens when we overlay the 5 ways to innovate across that kind of spectrum. We can see things like upskilling and innovation labs is a very invested approach. And when you do that, don't do it just for the sake of it. It needs to be with that long-term, internally focusing to say, hey, we are going to be an innovative organization. On the other side, incubators and ecosystems, well, that's more of a divested play. Hey, we're going to sit back, let the market do a lot of the initial legwork, and then we'll make our strategic plays as we go. Now, the key thing that we see with great innovators, corporates who are excellent, excellent innovators, they don't pick just one. They take a portfolio mentality to all of this. And in fact, the best innovators in the world, we see them scoring across all 5 of these things. Now, that's kind of contrary to logic, right? We always hear, well, you need to place your bets or double down and all this kind of language. But actually, when it comes to innovation, you're doing something by nature. The word innovation means doing new things, right? You're doing something that literally no one has ever done before. You can't just pick one thing and say, yep, that's our bet. We're going to bet the house on that one thing and absolutely go for that thing. The best innovators are those who spread it around. So here's a large telco in this region, for example, we've been working with. They have an incubator, which is quite a well-known fact. But as well as that, they're also investing heavily in a lot of learning and development programs. I'm actually not allowed to mention client names or organization names, which is why we kind of anonymize everything at the top. But I'm sure you can probably guess who some of these companies are. Interestingly, they have a startup studio type setup right now. There's a bunch of consultants sitting inside their organization in a cool, funky space with beanbags and all that sort of thing. But they're actually working on real projects. And the corporation's own staff are also working in that same space alongside them. There's capability transfer. As we say, at the moment, it's kind of, we do, they observe, and then gradually you move to a they do, we observe type model. So you do this capability transfer over time. And we've successfully done this with a couple of organizations. We built a testing and design capability within an FMCG from 0 to 100% within 6 months. We were completely out of there. Within 6 months, they had a full capability. So it can work when you spread your bets like that. Here's a Singaporean bank. They very famously have an innovation lab, but I hear they're not allowed to innovate. So they're doing lots of other things. They're doing lots of other things besides that. Again, this is not something that I've worked on, but they are actually, again, they're very good. They score across all 5 of these things in some way, shape, or form. The interesting one for me was the ecosystem play. I guess it's not so much partnering with startups per se, but definitely there are some tech platforms. Thanks, Trina. Some tech platforms and the like out there where they say, okay, well, there's a particular segment of the market we want to target. We need to bring new services to them that are not, the traditional kind of banking services. Who's out there that we can partner with? And you can probably guess who I'm talking about. But so they are actually doing interesting things outside of just the innovation lab stuff, which is great to see. That's why these organizations are successful innovators, because they spread their bets, they take a portfolio mentality. Now, I just wanted to finish with one very quick story, I suppose, of a company that is right at the very beginning of their innovation journey. It's an oil and gas company, and we have been working with them to effectively, I suppose, build an internal incubator, for want of a better term. Basically building an environment and processes and skills inside the organization to help them innovate. And basically, I mean, our kind of play around that is to help them transition from business models that are around fossil fuels into more sustainable sort of spaces. In order to do that, they need to find new business models because they are a very financially driven organization, right? So this was one example where we've been doing a leadership program with them. We brought a whole bunch of their leaders over here to Singapore for 5 days, ran a lab with them and kind of, took them on a bit of a roadshow. Here's how startups work and, different ways of thinking, which is all new to them. So we take them around and get them to actually meet startups, shake their hand, look them in the eye, kind of talk about how they solve problems. And then we actually guide them through kind of some problem-solving processes, some of the design thinking things, introduce them to agile ways of working. We set them up with projects or initiatives that they then take back to the office, and we then coach them for the next 90 days to get to some sort of POC, which is not necessarily a piece of technology, but quite literally by the definition of the word POC, just proving that their concept's actually going to work, which they'll then pitch and get funding around that. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with technology. So, unsurprisingly, a lot of the obvious things came out of this lab. There were ideas around monetizing their data relationships, just, the typical sort of ideas that come out of these things. Lots of app ideas. App ideas were a dime a dozen in this lab. My favorite one, though, was there was one group, they were working on a problem. They'd chosen the working mum as their customer. And the problem was, in this region, there are certain markets where people spend between 2 and 4 hours a day commuting to and from work. So, which is hard for anyone, right? But especially if you're a working mum, on top of that, you need to buy the groceries, do the banking, pick up the kids from school, make their lunches. There's just so many other expectations on working mums in particular. So the group itself was comprised of about 5 males and 1 female. They were ideating on a wall, kind of drawing things up on a flip chart, and all of their ideas had come around, well, how do we help people work from home then so they don't have to commute, they can do all of those things. How do we just make it easier for people to work from home? And, they kind of got really bogged down in, well, how do we get fast internet speeds, and how do we ensure people can do VCs and Skype calls from home, and there was one idea, how do we install a monitoring system to ensure that people are actually working, they're not just slacking off at home, which is great to see. Anyway, all of this time, actually the one woman in the group, she was kind of standing off on the sidelines. So I just went over to her and I said, listen, I can see those guys, they're getting really into this, they're ideating and stuff, but can I just ask a personal question? Do you have kids? And she was like, yeah. She was the customer. She was a working mum. And so I just asked her, honestly, this solution that they're coming up with, working from home, am I out of time? Okay. 90 seconds. Working from home, is that really something you want to do? And she said, no, I love going to work. I get to socialize with people. I get to work in an environment where, I kind of feel a buzz around that. So where we quickly pivoted the idea was to say, okay, how about we build these regional hubs, which is kind of like a co-working space, but not really. Let's call them micro offices that exist in regional suburban areas where people can go and work from there. Okay, that's great. Well, we've got staff retention, we've got staff attraction, possibly we're reducing operating costs. We've got some metrics there, but this company is very, very financially driven. How do we push it further? I kept pushing them further. The idea they come up with is, well, what about, we've got now a captive audience of tens of thousands of people working in these spaces. Why don't we charge the banks and the grocery companies and all of these companies to come into that space and provide their services to them? As well as that, does it really just have to be our own employees? Why can't we build this as a service and sell it to other people? So they've come up with kind of a mashup of a few different concepts. They're right now, this was last month, so they're in the process of kind of building out what would that look like as a business, and they will be pitching for it. But within the event itself, they got up and pitched it to a panel of their peers and some of their leaders. And what was really heartening was that she was the one who took the lead on the pitch. She stood front and center. She pitched the idea. One of the dragons in the Dragon's Den gave them funding on the spot, and they got a standing ovation. So it's just one little story that's, I guess, a heartwarming story to end on, of how you can combine lots of different ways of innovating within a corporate, even if they've never innovated before, to come up with innovative solutions. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's the 5 ways to innovate.